housekeeping in advance, guys. If you happen to be listening to this episode on Spotify, it may not be as well edited as my usual since I'm not streaming, but I'm doing close to. So what I'm doing right now is just taking advantage of my new webcam. So look, you're not going to miss much visually, but I'd like to flag that in terms of audio quality, I may be a little bit even more all over the place than usual because essentially I'm reading off a sheet of paper. So you're going to hear some clicking, some scratching around, that kind of thing. And to be perfectly honest, I'm not really that high on the energy charts at the moment to be sitting there fiddling with video editing and DAW, all those sorts of things for hours. So I just wanted to flag that first. But with that tangential introduction out of the way, welcome to one of the first of what I hope is many longer form video / audio episodes for the Inner Strength Check podcast. If you have been listening or watching, you'll know that I've done several interviews recently, and we'll get into that a bit later. For today, it's been a really hectic 6 months for me and for my partner and for a lot of you out there. So I just want to acknowledge that something that's a bit of a broken record theme for me is that I feel that in this post-pandemic environment, i.e. 2020 onwards, as we've gotten out of lockdown, I think a lot of us who have languished probably more than they perceive others to have, can feel a little bit, especially like they're still playing catch up with the sort of aftershock of lockdown and making our way into this new normal. Because let's face it, 2021 onwards, once we're out of the cage, it's never been the same. It really hasn't. And in a lot of ways, it's actually kind of worse. So I'll dive into that a little bit later. But I just wanted to flag that I've got a lot of stuff up here. There's a lot of stuff that I've been releasing, and I think that it also gives the impression that I've been productive. However, you've got to also factor in that most of what I've been posting is things like base covers, which is fine. But those also aren't mega high effort compared to the more long form podcast content. And to be perfectly honest, there's one series in particular which was actually meant to be a 2023 retrospective, and that's it. And I published part 1 late last year in November. My intention was to have that finished by December. We are now in June, so I've actually folded that over into what was also going to be, due to time and life constraints, more of a retrospective / perspective, a look at the year ahead. But here we are, we're in June, so time's really flying by at the moment. Anyway, first things first, I wanted to just chat a little bit more about my personal situation, and I don't want to get too into the weeds with the details and make this too much of a, as someone with ADHD, I'm very prone to just telling you, whether you asked or not. But there's been quite a bit happening in my personal life. So I was recently diagnosed with autism at level 2, and I think my experience around the assessment of that and my thoughts around it warrant at least an episode. I think there's a lot to unpack there, especially because for me, I feel like ADHD, being a social worker, being social enough, being presenting neurotypical enough. I mean, you might not argue that from the way my room looks, and you can't see the IKEA bookcase full of TTRPG books and board games right there. But for all intents and purposes, I present normal enough, and I always have. And so, yeah, look, that's a big conversation for another day. I think that I've worked through most, not really sure of the internalized ableism side of that, but that's been a big part of this year. And my partner and I are both diagnosed ADHD, which has been a revelation for us, but it's been a tricky process. And by God, the irony of being neurodivergent and trying to get assessed for being neurodivergent is ironically the most neurodivergent, unfriendly experience I think people can have, but more on that later. So what about my mental health, since this is also a podcast about mental health? Look, I actually feel like in terms of, because I also have comorbid major depression and generalized anxiety disorder diagnoses, your boilerplate mood stuff, which statistics show 75% of neurodivergent folks, and when I say neurodivergent, I'm of course referring to the broader tent of neurodivergence, not just ADHD and ASD. Again, another episode for another topic. Every time I say that, I actually do mean it. We'll get into that in a bit. I've got quite a lot of stuff on the horizon. But I feel like the more depressive element's improving, but I'm continuing to experience pretty prolonged and severe burnout, and I've been languishing for a few years, but the functional aspect has really taken a dive, and there's been some mutual challenges between partner and myself, health, mental health, disability, etc. I've had more so than myself, so that's been a bit of a space to navigate, but we're getting through it how we can. And by God, it is funny as a social worker when you come up against the access barriers, which you knew were coming, you know what they are, but to experience it firsthand, it's just, yep. Also, the fact that I work in clinical mental health myself, which I always find the most ironic fucking thing ever. By the way, not a family-friendly podcast. I swear a fucking lot, so deal with it or don't. But a lot of vicarious trauma for me, not just from a peer or consumer perspective, having had experiences with mental health myself, but just witnessing the bottlenecking, the judiciousness, the risk aversion, just how absolutely annihilated at least the Victorian mental health system is. I mean, we've had a Royal Commission into Mental Health here last year, and from my perspective, those changes haven't amounted to much in terms of direct ground practice and change, and in fact, I see it as far too little, far too late. But that is also another topic for another time. Trust me, it is. Some good news though, I feel that my sort of anhedonia and complete lack of interest in a lot of these things, which ironically I'm doing a podcast about, is starting to improve. I think my executive functioning is just so shot that my capacity to engage in those things is honestly fucked. But I do feel that there's a sort of a tinge more motivation there, which is good. It's just sort of obstructed by this bastard of a frontal lobe right here. I do have plenty of gigs coming up, lots of gigs, and gigs for me are really medicinal. They're like a PRN. I need to be going to see live music or experiencing live music in some form on a semi-regular basis, as much as my wallet complain about it, because it's just, for me, it is of equal effectiveness as, say, an antidepressant. It's a really important part of my well-being, and it even factored into decision making around like where to live. As much as I honestly hated living in capital cities for about 10 years, the sheer advantage of being able to go to see gigs, that's factored to me moving regional, but not too regional in Victoria. I'm sure you'd be able to cobble together where the hell I live if you're going to dox me or something, but okay. You can turn up and see my messy house full of geeky shit, that's fine. So what about plans? What about actual plans for the podcast? Well, let's get to that in a second, shall we? Had to take a Coke break, and not that type. I'm on the legal stuff. Psychiatrist prescribe. Anyway, what are the actual plans? So this is a June update. I'm calling it a change blog update because I think I'm so funny, and that's the nerdiest shit ever, and it's not that funny, but hey. So part of the change blog update, I wanted to discuss the plans that I've got in motion for Inner Strength Check. We've had some massive changes, and I say we in the plural sense because I would like to also formally welcome, as I have on a previous video, I'll do it again. Welcome to my esteemed new colleagues, Hamza and Mal. Both of them come with quite a wealth of music journalism and industry and musicianship experience. They're both quite keen, and their content has been great so far. So Mel actually released his first piece, which is a Story of the Year retrospective, which is available on the blog. Go check it out, innerstrengthcheck.com, of course. And I have full faith in their abilities, having worked with Hamza recently, a few years past, for the Overdrive Music Magazine, of which he was one of the senior contributors. Mal has also worked for the prestigious Heavy Mag in SA. And we're looking at doing a range of stuff. So starting off with a retrospective, I've encouraged the guys to be creative and not necessarily feel tethered to just doing reviews and press releases. Although part of the value add for me is that with my current kind of levels of burnout and my obligations and that sort of thing, I mean, on top of managing what I've got right now, which is a lot, it's a lot at work, it's a lot outside of work, it's a lot in my personal life, it's a lot. As I imagine is for you too. I'm also looking at potentially, when my work contract expires, expanding into private practice. However, I'm going to need some additional support to do that. I have a lot of requirements around that, and I'm going to get into that in another episode, and I'll flag what that episode is later. But nevertheless to say, I'm very glad to have two skilled contributors on the team, so welcome to both of you guys. Some frustrations along the way. This is also earmarking both a number of prior episodes, which you can check out on Spotify or on the blog or YouTube, around my frustrations with social media, around my frustrations with the way that big tech is basically butchering itself. I mean, I don't need to tell you guys, right? Between the Ouroboros that is AI and language learning models and changes to the algorithm and prioritizing sponsored content, all that sort of thing, I'm finding, because I like to work off desktop more so than apps for this sort of stuff, just as a sort of a quality check, and I'm more comfortable doing that. I'm finding desktop experiences for things like Facebook and Instagram, which, by the way, I only really use Instagram semi-begrudgingly, even though I post there a lot. Look, I almost pulled the plug on having social media at all for Inner Strength Check. Look at my hair, it's gone crazy. Such is the level of just frustration with it. But that's really impeded a lot of my motivation to engage here, because it's so frustrating. And for those of you who are making a living out of online content, I really feel for you right now, because the arms race against an increasingly monetized algorithm, no bueno. So trying to sort of slog and sort through getting content out on social media, and I'm not super promotional and going through that content creator culture of making it all bright and pizzazzy and, shit flying at you from left, right, and center, and a wonderful, clean videos. I'm just some fucking dude talking. This is a hobby podcast, man. So in terms of new stuff, let's go to new now. Let's stop complaining about social media. Number one, I still need to edit episode 21 in audio form, so I've actually recorded it. I just need to slog through the process that is going on Reaper and editing an episode in a digital audio workstation, which, to be frank, has been a huge barrier for me, because I find it cumbersome and difficult and frustrating. But nevertheless, I've posted quite a lengthy retrospective on the blog, a written one, which I loosely sort of used as a rubric for the spoken stuff. But there is a Spotify episode coming, and on that note, I did mention earlier in the year that I would be not putting my stuff on YouTube due to fears around censorship and that sort of thing. And I don't mean like, the man, it's a private entity, it's YouTube. More so in terms of worrying about the fact that with Inner Strength Check, I often talk about things like some pretty touching issues on mental health, social issues, that sort of thing. And it seems that now more so than ever, going back to the trap that I talked about with apps, because everything's being auto-moderated, oftentimes people who are producing useful content that covers challenging topics, and I'm not talking conspiracy theorist, anti-masker shit. By the way, I'm just gonna bit of a vape, bit of. These are fucked, by the way. If you're looking to quit smoking, just quit. Don't go to vapes. Anyway. Look, I still need to edit this review, and to be frank, I passed the PARSED, my review of 2023 and 2024 of pretty much everything I sort of wanted to look at setbacks and challenges first. So that episode is very focused on what I believe to be a new sort of pandemic, not a new pandemic, but an increasing pandemic of burnout. So that's a pretty heavy episode, and I also think that's maybe why I've shied away from posting it, because it means re-exposure to the stuff I've been pissed off about. Nevertheless, that is coming. And it's going to act as a prelude to a prelude. Now, what do I mean by that? So that episode, number 21, is going to dovetail into a much more positive, strengths-based, but also realistic. It's not going to be la la sunshine and roses, because what sunshine and roses are there in 2024? I don't know. Not many that I can see. Trying to find them. But yeah, essentially that is going to dovetail into a more strengths-based discussion, which I'm starting to think that to keep the scope of this podcast and less of a sort of hodgepodge, random topics fashion, and to sort of categorize things for listeners, because I am aware, and watchers now, and readers, listen, watch, read, all that sort of stuff. I get the sense that, just having a mishmash of everything, where one day I could be talking about something from social work, sociology, or psychology about X, and then a tabletop review of Y, which was intentional. I want to make this genuine and about all the different aspects of myself, but I also am mindful that's not most people's experiences when they're signing up for a podcast or following a podcast. So in order to help you sort of disseminate better as a viewer, reader, listener, what have you, what you want to listen to in this podcast, then I've decided to categorize some of the more broader, macro, social level discussions that are focused on things like mental health and psychology, but take that more sort of, how do we look at change management, community development, some ways we can kind of positively navigate this boring, anxiety provoking. Isn't it funny that 2024 is both boring and anxiety provoking in terms of just life and culture? I'm going to be distilling that into a very broad stroke series that I'm calling Undoing Ruin, and a lot of that is going to be informed by a lot of my principles and values as a social worker, as a human services worker. It won't be too academic, I hope, but it's going to be more informed by that than other aspects of the podcast, because I'm mindful we're talking inner strength check, hobbies, riffs, and mental health. I didn't exactly want to make it too dystopic or too depressive or cynical, although it is me. And it is 2024 and I'm a millennial, but hence, nevertheless, etc., etc. Undoing Ruin is basically where I'm going to be compartmentalizing a lot of that sort of society-wide, collective conscious, managing change. How do we work together to self-advocate, to advocate and empower for self and community? So while the next episode is going to be pretty depressing, to be honest, a lot of pretty bleak statistics and that sort of thing, it's kind of going to be the exhaust vent of that, and what that dissipates into is a much more open space in terms of positive content, in terms of Well, yeah, I think one of the things that I really struggle with is doomerism because I'm a very pessimistic and cynical person, markedly so. But even I'm starting to grate and tire of just this ceaseless rhetoric around how fucked everything is. And look, maybe we are fucked, but I just want to sort of inject some form of hope into that equation. And I do even speak to that in that episode where I'm not a religious or a spiritual person, but I am strongly adamant around my belief that in the end the good guys always win. Because they do. The bad guys get deplatformed. I mean, it's Buddhism, it's impermanence, it's entropy. Empires fall, despots are dethroned, geography changes. Everything's in constant flux. So the idea that this late stage capitalism is it, I don't exactly subscribe to it. There's a lot of risk involved if we don't take action. And I'll be talking about that action as part of Undoing Ruin, just my suggestions or observations, but I also want to feed that in from expertise, community discourse, and even bring some of you in, some peers, some professionals, some experts, that sort of thing. So, but if you're not interested in that, because primarily podcast is a hobby for me, and a huge focal point of the podcast is hobbies and enjoying stuff during my thrust of this podcast is let's just find some ways to find meaning and enjoy life with how incorrigibly fucked everything is. Nevertheless, I got a lot to say on a lot of things, and I think Undoing Ruin is a nice kind of compartmentalization of that. So that's a big upcoming element of my series ongoing, which I hope to work on long term. So if that sounds interesting to you in terms of getting involved, I am more than happy to interview almost literally anyone about anything, anytime. That's the beauty of this podcast. The scope is virtually unlimited. So keep that in mind. So second point, got some new gear. It's not the greatest webcam. I mean, I think it cost me $30 or something on Amazon. Again, I'm not spending a small fortune when my internet in regional Vic isn't gonna sort of come up to the plate with cutting edge, high tech, expensive hardware. Anyway, I've got this thing. So I've got a few extra bits of gear. I've got a cardioid microphone and some cables for the for my smartphone. So to explain that a little bit better, what I use to actually tabulate songs, so I might do that myself. I find that it's more stimulating and better for my attention long term. I'm more likely to practice using Rocksmith 2014 because pretty colors and keeps my attention, and it's a little bit gamified. So I'm using that. I prefer it to Guitar Pro, although a lot of my cover tabs are actually Guitar Pro. I just find it less personally appealing to play covers. Quite a lot of my covers are by ear, but for me, my default is Rocksmith 2014, and put a pin in that one because talking about Rocksmith Plus is a whole episode of its own. Same with Rocksmith 2014 and my now 11 years of experience with it, and the influence it's had on me. But suffice to say, in terms of the music, I think that for now, until I really figure out the ins and outs of using this thing, and for those listening, this is a Scarlett Focusrite direct input, so I actually sit down and actually have the mental bandwidth to figure all that sort of shit out, I think I'm kind of relegated to making covers off my phone, because my S21, actually it has 6 lenses, it's got quite good capability for video recording, it's just that the sound's a bit... So I think the mic has shifted that, at least somewhat. So I think you can actually hear a little bit of a quality change, not too much, because again, a lot of YouTubers that are doing covers, what they'll do is they'll actually record themselves playing line that up to a track, edit that into a video. And to be honest, I'd love to do that, but right now capacity. So for multiple reasons, I record off my phone, and also I find it a lot less imposing. For instance, having it out of view kind of helps with a bit with like performance anxiety, which I do struggle with playing music. But yeah, I've been smashing out a bunch of bass covers lately. I think I had my 40th cover just recently. I posted a whole bunch last week while I was off on leave. I can't record a whole bunch because of the amount of space it takes up on my phone, and deleting all the memes and photos of my cat off my phone and all the other stuff I've backlogged since 2017 on there. That's a whole mission. So I'm just sort of slowly burning through my list of covers. By the way, I have over 4,000 songs to cover, and not just 4,000 songs to cover on bass, but I'm looking at doing bass, guitar, and fretless bass versions as well. I'll this thing. Thank you to my good friend Nate for allowing me to purchase this very cheaply compared to what it's worth. This thing is beautiful. I can't stop playing it to the point where my guitar strings actually are coated in dust because I can't get myself away from this thing. If you're a bass player, as someone who has crippling imposter syndrome and doesn't even see themselves as a musician in any way, shape or form, which I know sounds ridiculous, but that's also another episode, I'd recommend giving fretless a look into, because this one is unlined. It has the fret markers, thank fuck, but it's unlined and unfretted, and I've actually had a much easier time playing that than my fretted basses. I'm sorry guys, I'll get some luck too. Yeah, but on that note, in terms of covers, I'm actually, as we speak, I'm going to continue working on it tonight. It's a lot of work because there's a lot of songs. I have a spreadsheet and it's huge. So one of the things I'm doing is I'm creating a song master list. So in the past, I've streamed off Rocksmith, and I recognize people using macros, like they would type exclamation mark RS, which is like song request, and I think that kind of auto updates the queue, that sort of thing. Again, I don't have the time, the attention, or faculties to deal with all that. What I'd rather do is create a bit of like kind of a master list of songs, and that will be released very soon. So that's going to have the playlist from YouTube with all my existing covers, which if you go to my YouTube channel and just search, it should be called at the moment ISC Riffs and Music, which I think is a bit of a redundant title, so I think I might need to change that maybe by the time this recording goes out. Nevertheless, there's a lot of covers coming, and I've broken it down into what I've already covered, whether that's been covered on guitar, bass, or fretless bass, or all three, so that if you're looking for a guitar version of a cover, I might not actually have the tabs available for each thing in each instance. But if you feel like requesting something that's already been covered, albeit in a different format, like say bass but not guitar, guitar not bass, hit me up. So you'll be able to request those. I'll provide socials links in the show notes. They're also available on my website. Just hit me up, send me a message, send me an email. Okay, so that's a lot of work putting that one together. So hopefully I get that out soon, but it's been a while coming. Another thing that's been a while coming, and this is something that I'll get to. I keep alluding to, I'll get to this thing. I will get to it towards the end, but I'm planning on maybe just looking at creating some ambient music to start off with, particularly using the fretless. Again, that involves use of digital audio workstations and the learning curve associated with that versus my time and energy. It's not practical at the moment, but that's also a goal in the future. Now, with the addition of the 2 new members to my team, welcome once again, guys. We've sort of set up a bit of an agreement to have some reviews and promo posts on at least some sort of regular interval, not too regular, not like your big mags with large teams, but I also do want to get back into reviewing albums. And as per what I've been doing recently, which is literally reading some of the written reviews and posting that in audio form for the podcast on Spotify, I plan on continuing doing that into the future. Look, it's a bit of extra work, but I have the keys. Like, for myself, I don't have to bludgeon myself with a whole conga line of written reviews to be rendered or that sort of thing. With my general life situation, mental health, all that sort of stuff, I found it really, probably the last 2 years, for the first time since I was pre-teen, really, where it's been really difficult to keep up with all the good quality music that's coming out. And I used to be obsessively just backlogging and listening to it all, but again, burnout and what have you. But I do plan to just start dipping back into that as well. And something I am interested in doing, and I'll be approaching some promoters and the like about this soon, is actually looking at live gig reviews. That's not recorded live, but live reports, that sort of thing. So that's something that I'm very interested in for myself and my team. So if you're after anyone to review, especially heavy music gigs, but it's not contained to that, in the Melbourne, Greater Victoria region, hit us up. Just throwing that in there. But just in terms of the amount of content that I have lined up, so this comes to my next point, and this is ridiculous. So I have been brain dumping and hyper systemizing and categorizing and chucking stuff into just abyssal, incredibly convoluted note apps that look they look equally OCD as they do just impenetrable walls of mush. There is so much content lined up for this podcast. To give you an example, my Word document, which contains the themes, not the individual topics, just the themes, of which there are topics, and many of those have subtopics. For instance, let's take an example, extreme metal and sensory modulation and emotion regulation. That's not a topic. That's a theme, and there are several sub-themes under that, and then that branches out. It's into a genogram that it goes deep, and so imagine that as one dot point, yeah? Just visualize Word doc open, cursors blinking. So imagine that as a dot point. I have 40 pages of those. I'm never going to get through them all, but obviously I'm going to prioritize. I actually do want to sort of get started on some of this stuff. But my frustration, again, is just this ongoing environment that we're in the 2020s. I find it really difficult to even draw threads out of that and continue on. But I really, on top of getting my business set up, managing work and life stuff, and engaging with my hobbies, more on that in a second. Yes, I'll get to that point eventually. I'm just frustrated because I feel like I've just had a billion mental fire ants. This backlog is just swelling in my brain. So I'm actually going to purge a bunch of that, and I'll be making a content roadmap, which will be available on the website, and that's going to systematically lay out a lot of those themes, a lot of what's coming up, a lot of what's available. And so, similar to the songs list, if you see a topic there with which you'd actually like to jump on as a guest or even host, and I can just be the naive questioner, co-host, observer, guest for you on this podcast, if that makes sense. Like, you come on, you're the expert, because I'm not the expert in much, and I'd love to hear other people's opinions and voices, and I'd love to give voice to a lot of other people and use some empowerment there for our community in many different aspects. So once that's available, that will be published online. I might put a short on YouTube or what have you just to announce it. content roadmap. There's so much there, guys. There's so much. I've been talking for 35 minutes. I reckon if I talked briefly to some of the themes, we'd be going an hour plus, and it would just be mentally draining. So, but the sheer, and that is with refining the scope of inner strength check, which originally I kind of thought, let's just throw everything at it. That's after refining it. So I've got a lot in the brain. Yeah. So the content roadmap is going to be a major addition to the website. It's going to be one of the top links up top. And it'll be regularly updated ongoing. And that's also going to help the lads who are helping me with contributions to get a sense of where the podcast is at, where the blog is at. And let's bring it back to hobbies, but I need some more fizzy drink. Give me a sec. You Americans, you call it pop, soda pop, fizzy drink, soft drink, whatever the fuck you want to call it. Coke, no sugar, okay? Whatevs. Anyway, next part. I've been making allusions to this sort of episode, and I have actually mentioned this prior. So another really important series for me to... A lot of what I'm talking about in terms of my topical content is very much directed at for other people and other people's experiences or my experiences and how that relates. But I sort of want to make a semi-regular series called Behind Screen and Speaker. And, you know, it's a bit of a lame dad pun. Behind screen is in behind tabletop screen, behind this screen, behind speaker is in amps, speakers, what have you. You get the gist. I'm not going to edit that burp out, by the way. So behind screen and speaker is where I'm going to talk a little bit more to these kind of life updates, but not in, you know, excruciating detail. But similar to Undoing Ruin, I want to make the focus on my enjoyment. Yes, the challenges and barriers from me and my perspective with getting into hobbies, but also focusing on just what are some things I've been into. Just, you know, you see a lot of blogs, they do music roundups, and music's one element, or games, my top games, blah, blah, blah. So it's going to be a bit of that. Music that I've been enjoying, new music, maybe some old favourites, and I'm sure that'll relate to some content, because I actually do want to do some archival album reviews for albums that I've loved that aren't current, but recent or historical, back in the old days of heavy metal in the 1800s. But yeah, I do definitely want to have just a kind of update series like this, but it's just purely focused on what am I doing? But what am I doing with my time to enjoy myself outside of all this bullshit? How's that going? What are some things I dug? What are some things I thought of? What are some barriers to those that aren't me facing? What are some things that have dropped off? Because with ASD and ADHD, it's very much a case of when the dopamine runs out, which is why I've got a few things lingering on the website and stuff that have kind of, those things I'm going to get into. But there's a lot there. So I mentioned a lot of the music stuff there. Tabletop and board gaming is a whole other thing. So I actually have quite a number of things lined up at the moment. For tabletop role-playing games, I've got just a staggering amount of stuff. One of the newer things that I've decided to do with myself and a couple of friends who are playing in the Forbidden Lands RPG campaign, by the way, fucking awesome tabletop system. My first ever foray into fantasy, which is a genre I'm more of a sci-fi dude, but Forbidden Land, I am loving it. It's the most fun I've ever had GMing. It's so good. And from that, I'm actually doing a little choose your own adventure style, like play by post light on Discord. And what we're doing there is we're actually going to be feeding that into kind of an audio drama where I narrate it. I don't know in what kind of voice. It could be something like this.
or it could be something a little more fantasy oriented. I'm not sure. I haven't thought of the particulars yet, but as you can see, my lip is quite stiff. I don't know. I haven't really thought about narration or anything like that yet, but we'll get to that. But that's going to include sound effects and ambience and that sort of thing. So I don't really want to get into things purely for how can I churn this into content, but I also want to show creative expression and how, for instance, just emergent stories that can come from things like playing a tabletop RPG campaign. So, first up, in the case of Kronk, who is a very crazy, batty orc, elderly orc who hobbles around and somehow is also a very stealthy rogue and with knives strapped to her like Neo in the Matrix with the duster, and it's just guns except it's daggers. Very interesting character, and Ben, spot on role playing. Spot on role playing. Yeah, mate, you heard me. That's right. You get a shout out. But we're doing a little bit of a sort of a backstory audio drama, which is specifically around the heist that leads to Kronk's arrest. So we already know how it ends. We're just seeing how it unfolds together. And that's going to be published. So watch out for that, because it's going to include narration by myself and my player. And boy, is it going to be, it's going to be fun. Kronk's a funny character. She's good. She's good. So there's that. There's going to be quite a lot of reviews of certain tabletop systems, maybe even some retrospectives on old campaigns. My experiences with GMing, I think, are pretty different to a lot of other GMs. I find that ADHD really challenges my capacity with tabletop role playing, especially where like dyscalculia and issues with math are concerned, and that's a common bugbear of mine, pun intended, as well as remembering rules, that sort of thing. But I just want to do some retrospectives on some previous campaigns, have some broader level meta chats about systems and that kind of thing. So, yes. And then a lot of solo content, which again, listen to the amount of stuff I'm going. We're 40 minutes in now. I haven't even scratched the surface, but I got really into solo role playing games and solo board games during the pandemic because I was working from home on a screen. I turned the screen off. I got on Rocksmith on a screen. I turn that off. I play physically in front of an amp, and then I'm back to video gaming or something. It was just years of my eyes bleeding, and I just needed physicality, and that was just a hyperfixation at the time, and it's something that's really dropped off, and I don't like that, but I also don't really have the capacity to engage in it. But when I'm feeling better, I'm feeling fresher in terms of my energy, I really want to dive into some solo tabletop role playing. So some examples of that is Twilight 2000 4th edition by Free League Games. It's a redo of an old series. I have alluded to that with some posts on Instagram probably about start of this year, a year ago, something crazy. That's not dead, but it's on the way. So I'm looking at doing maybe a solo open world emergent sandbox campaign where it evolves and there's some oracles and stuff, and I don't know what's going to happen. There's going to be a bit of meta with that. Whether that gets converted into a similar sort of story format as the Kronk audio drama series, I don't know. And I'm going to be using the Kronk thing, the Forbidden Lands audio drama, as kind of my litmus test to see how work intensive that actually is. Yeah. But I've got a lot of solo and co-op board games, and now with this new webcam, because previous to that I was just however I could rotate my goddamn laptop, which doesn't make great for angles and that sort of thing, but I actually do want to do some physical board gaming stuff. And you got maps out, minis, that kind of thing, and get real nerdy with it. So I'll be doing a lot of solo and co-op board gaming. I've got several what you would call solo / co-op RPG war games, 5 Parsecs and 5 Leagues from the Borderlands. Shout the fuck out to Nordic Weasel, you do an amazing job. Love to have you on the show. Things like that. So, sprinkling in a little bit, it's not going to be as stellar as like not Roll20, Critical Role or Me, Myself and Die or Three Skulls Tavern or any of those fucking awesome solo gaming YouTubers, geek gamers, fantastic. It's probably not going to be the same quality, but it'll be something. But I do want to delve a bit more into that, pun intended for you Iron Sworn listeners. Whether that comes out as like actual plays as it's happening or I sit back and do a bit of a summary, I'm not really sure yet, because my capacity to even play those sorts of things probably feels more shot than what it is, but nevertheless there's a lot going on there. So yeah, and I did recently post about a program called Dungeon Alchemist, which is a really nice and sort of AI generating 3D virtual tabletop. So I want to dig in and do some streams and stuff where I poke around with these different sorts of programs. And through all of this, I want to do a lot of kind of like behind the hood stuff, like having a look at my organizational process and programs I use to keep on top of all this shit, keep on top of my life, some handy apps and some handy resources for your mental health and your well-being. So there's really, at the end of the day, this is an update, but I'm not even beginning to scratch the surface of what's ahead with Inner Strength Check, and we're talking multiple years plus. I hope to be doing this for years continuing. So things to watch out for in the near future. Number one, some more content from Hamza and Mal and myself with written reviews, which may become like spoken word on the podcast. Expect some return to more of those longer form topical episodes, those in-depth podcast episodes as before. Expect a little bit more, hopefully a little bit of tabletop content on the website. I plan to do some promotion for indie publishers as well, so indie tabletop RPG designers, video game designers, board game designers, please hit me up. Okay, artists, musicians, health professionals, mental health consumers, music industry reps, and anything. Come on, bring it. Let's chat. I plan on doing a lot more video interviews. I'd love to branch out. I've been very fortunate in being able to interview a lot of music scene luminaries such as Tony Forrester from Municipal Waste, what a dude. Serena Cherry from Svalbard, what a sweetheart, and just many others. So while I hope to continue doing that, I also like to give the other guys an opportunity to do some of these interviews, even if they don't feel like being on video, that's fine. But I really do want to sort of broaden my scope of people that I'm getting in for chats. I may potentially even get my tabletop RPG group in for a discussion around some campaigns, or our group, and just have general chit chat, that kind of thing. So I'm really looking not just to promote local content. And on that note, at the end of this video, you will see a link to the artist Minus Life, who is responsible for the theme show. That's another addition. I will be regularly interjecting my video and audio episodes with local musicians, Australian and international underground musicians. So if you would like some promotional material, if you have any electronic press kits, if you have an upcoming game you're designing, if you have a cool idea, if you have something you want to get off your chest, something you want to discuss, you want to shoot the shit just in general with me and have a chat for an hour, or just unstructured, or 10 minutes, or I don't care. So yeah, it's a real gumbo soup. I recognize that, but that's the intention, because I kind of want to show all of myself, and I want to promote a wide range of leisure, lifestyle, hobbies as basically a form of advocacy, activism, and really reiterate to you guys that no matter how fucked up and depressing the world gets, and it's pretty bad right now, yeah, it's pretty bad, let's not lie, there's always avenues for expression, there's always avenues for socialization, learning new things, or developing a craft and enjoying yourself while you do so. And I'm firmly of the belief that while mental illness and disability and things like that can be barriers, same as social isolation, there's always ways to adapt and to maneuver around that and to find meaning and purpose in your life. And I think that it should never be understated the power of your interests and your passions, new ones, old ones, in enhancing not only your well-being but developing a sense of community both locally, online, or wherever. So that's a brief update from me. Look forward to a lot more rambling from myself and some less rambly stuff from the other two. Peace, love, and grindcore.